Hello, everyone. I am Josh Fairhurst. I'm going to talk today about my time in the game industry. So, I was an NC State student from 2006 to 2010. When I graduated, I actually started my own game studio, Mighty Rabbit Studios. And right now, my main role is that I'm the CEO of Limited Run Games, and I'll kind of go over a lot of the stuff that I've done to get to where I am today and go over kind of what I do at those companies. So my early history, I started making games when I was in 5th grade. I used this thing called QBasic, which was at the time, very outdated programming language, and I made a horrible trivia game. And the entire trivia game just asks you questions that would only be answerable by a 4th grader in 1997. So going back and replaying it when I was making this slideshow presentation, I was not able to answer a single one of those questions. And it's kind of like a Souls-like game, because if you miss one question, you go all the way back to the first. So it's just auto-wipe every time you play it. So it's an impossible game. But that kind of got me my start making games, and it piqued my interest in it, so I started really digging into it, making some more complex things. We didn't have very good computers in my house growing up, so if I wanted to play a computer game, I either made it myself or, I was playing like the NES or Sega Genesis, whatever we had, which were outdated at the time. I was always kind of into entrepreneurial stuff, like making my own businesses, so I kind of used to sell things to my 5th grade class all the time. I'd make bootleg trading card games based on video games that came out at the time, so I made a Donkey Kong 64 one for some reason. I have no idea why, but that's what that is right there. And I used to make, gaming magazines and stuff. Whatever I could make and sell to my classmates, I would always be doing that. And that ended up getting me suspended for a little while, which sucked, but it kind of started me on a good road here. After that, I kind of gave up on making games for a little while, just kind of focused on being in high school and being a kid for a while. But at the end of high school, I kind of started thinking about what I was going to do with my life, and I still really loved games, and I still really liked the time that I had spent making games when I was younger. So I attended this thing that was a local expo in the area called Digital Game Expo. It's now become ECGC, and there I kind of learned more stuff about making games. I met a lot of people in the industry here. I met a lot of other students that were interested and engaged in trying to make games, and I learned that I could dual enroll at Wake Tech while I was in high school. So I started taking college-level game development courses while I was in high school, which was actually pretty awesome because they were super easy and they gave you AP credit. So knowing that, I kind of cheated my way into NC State because I took like 4 of those and got awesome GPA because of that. When I was at NC State, during my junior year, I got my first job in the industry. I don't recommend doing this. I got a job as a tester on Gears of War 2. I worked at Epic for about 5 months, and that was my first semester of junior year, and I worked 13-hour days, 7 days a week for all 5 of those months. It was miserable because that was on top of a full course load, so that was really hard to balance, and it kind of gave me my first taste of AAA game development, and I didn't like it a lot because I had no personal life. I couldn't really sleep. I couldn't see my friends or my family for a really long time, and that's fairly common in AAA games is, giving your life to make these games. I love the game we made. I love the work that I put into it, and I wouldn't really trade the experience for anything because it kind of opened my eyes to what I really wanted to do, which was make my own games. So during my senior year at NC State, I did the game design project, which is kind of, the old programming curriculum used to let you pick between doing one of 3 things for your final project. You could do like a boring final project for like AT&T or SAS or Oracle, or you could do a graphics final project, which were usually really hard and difficult and way out of my league. Or you could do a game final project. And of course I was going to do the game final project. So I really focused on that. And I made a game called Terraform, which was an open world chemistry-based first-person shooter. So you have this gun that shoots elements from a small selection of the periodic table, and you could kind of combine them to create compounds and solve puzzles that way to open new parts of the world. So the whole game was maybe about 40 minutes, playable from start to finish. And we really focused on making something that was as impressive as it could be, given that we had no art team, because NC State at the time really had no students doing art for games. It was just programming, really. So we kind of did what we could. All the assets that we made ourselves are basically just boxes that we put textures on. So game looks pretty ugly, but it played well, and we went all out when we presented. We really themed ourselves to the game because the game takes place in like an alternate 1970s. So we kind of like pretended we were from that timeline. And doing this presentation and showing how much care and love we put into our project, we got noticed by local investors who were looking to start a really terrible idea, actually, in hindsight, this thing called Joystick Labs that was in Durham. They were giving people with no experience $20,000 to start their own game companies. They weren't doing any research into whether these people could actually make games or not, but fate put them at my final project showcase. They saw my project, and I made a pitch for a game. I had no idea how I was actually going to make it, and they let me into the program and funded it. So I was going to switch to another presentation, but I think I'm just going to finish this one and then go to that if we still have time. Joystick Labs. I had a custom font on here, so you can see that didn't really work out changing to this thing here. So just, I'm not this much of a PowerPoint amateur. Let this slide. I founded Mighty Rabbit Studios in 2010. It was my final semester of college. I ended up having to do an extra semester just because of the time at Epic. It really put me off a little bit. And I started making this game that I had pitched, Saturday Morning RPG, with a friend that I'd actually met at that Digital Game Expo many years ago, this guy named Nick Allen, who he did the art, and then I programmed most of the core of the game, and we just kind of figured it out as we went along. And I would never have been able to do that if I hadn't, networked and met people like you guys are doing. Like at Wake Tech, I made sure I met all the other people there. I, really tried to connect with everybody so that, down the road when I needed help, when I needed people to help me make games, I would know where to tap into. So after 2 years, we finally managed to make this game called Saturday Morning RPG. It flopped financially, but it actually got pretty good critical reception. We got a lot of press. A lot of people in the game industry noticed it. We got a lot of downloads. We got featured by Apple, but we made a lot of bad decisions there. And I chalked most of that up to the fact that we had no idea what we were doing. We had a chance to be on Steam back when Steam had very little stuff on it, back when you could put like literal garbage on Steam and make $1 million. We turned that down to go on iPhone, where literally everybody was. I don't know why we thought that was a good idea, but we were like, oh man, Angry Birds is making so much money there. We should go there. And then we did like a free-to-play business model, which was really stupid. We accepted horrible contracts with publishers. There's one bad decision after another. And it kind of put me in a position where I felt hopeless and I wanted to give up. And you can see, Joystick Labs didn't really work out because they invested in a bunch of people that had no idea how to make games. But I kind of had that drive in me that pushed me to make something. So it was really just out of the 10 people they funded, it was me and like one other group of people that actually managed to ship a product. But everybody else just kind of fizzled out and they ran out of money. But I was able to pick things up. A friend that I had met along the way actually helped me land a contract project, which was building a game for another person. This company, Gun in Kentucky, they had this concept of doing a tactical military game that, their head, they were going to use this thing to train Navy SEALs or whatever. And they were telling me how they were going to make this game. They kept telling me all these horrible things that I couldn't really parse through. Like, there's not really going to be any gameplay. Like everything's going to do it for yourself. And we had to step in and suggest, like, why don't we do it this way? And after a lot of iteration, we managed to make this strategy game that actually felt really good and played really well. And it released in 2013, and it was a huge financial success. But for our client, not for us, because we had accepted basically work for hire. We got paid to make the game. We got nothing when the game actually sold well. So it ended up making like $5 million for our client, but we built it for $160,000. Womp womp. Again, felt a bit hopeless. We didn't know what we were going to do next. I'm going to preface some of this stuff that this was me recycling a keynote a little bit. I did a keynote at ECGC, so I apologize if anybody's already seen a lot of this. When I do talks, I try to talk about different things, but sometimes there's just general topics that I love to hit, and it's just this never give up is one of the themes of a lot of topics that I do when I talk. I really feel like if you hit failure, just keep pushing yourself through. So I try to tie that into a lot of my talks here. So we were at the end of Breach and Clear. We had no money, but it did well enough for our client where they ordered a sequel, which was this game called Breach and Clear Deadline. Our client at the time was playing Last of Us and Diablo, and he was like, oh, I want to take Breach and Clear and make it into this like Last of Us / Diablo type game. And we were pushing really hard against that, saying the first game was a tactical military strategy game where it was kind of supposed to be realistic, or at least as realistic as it could get and still be fun. Why are we suddenly doing this like dungeon crawler with zombies? And we had to try to satisfy them. And then 2 other publishers. We had Devolver Digital and Gambitious and Guns. So we had 3 different publishers, and they all wanted 3 different games. So in order to try to keep them happy and keep the money coming in, we tried to make 3 games crammed into 1 game, which is ridiculously hard to do. So I'm going to rattle off a description of that game, or at least try to. It is a turn-based, real-time strategy, multiplayer, open-world action RPG with procedurally generated dungeons and a full loot system. So we had to have this gameplay that was turn-based for fans of the original Breach and Clear. Then we had to have this real-time action gameplay for our client at Gun who wanted it to play like Diablo. And then we had to somehow, because one of our publishers wanted online multiplayer, make a turn-based game that could also be played by another person in another country as a real-time action game at the same time. And we had to somehow like seamlessly meld those things together, which was this crazy hard design challenge to figure out. But unsurprisingly, the game turned out kind of okay. In terms of reviews, we got around a 70, which, given that we built it in 11 months and it's a 40-hour game, it's got a 40-hour campaign and all of these features, and we had a team of 11 people and like a budget of $400,000, like, I'm surprised it came together the way it did, but it failed financially because it wasn't what people who played Breach and Clear wanted. So Gun blamed it on us, bailed on us, and then they went and made this massively successful game, Friday the 13th, with another developer. So we kind of missed this, big opportunity because this kind of got blamed on us, which, really stinks, but it kind of put me in a good spot. We had to think fast and get crazy. We had no money left in the bank, so I sat everyone at the company down. I kind of prepared them for closure. I told everyone, hey, it's likely that you're not going to have a job in the next, 3 or 4 weeks, because we've only got, I think at the time, maybe $10,000 left in the bank. But everybody at my company felt so passionate about continuing and trying to keep fighting that they convinced me to, figure something out. So I took an $85,000 personal loan at the absolute worst terms because I had no credit. I was running this indie development company for 5 years. I think I had like maybe $20,000 in credit card debt at the time. So to get that loan, I had to get like a 30% interest rate or something ridiculous. I would have been ruined if I couldn't pay it off. But I used that to start limited run games. We took Breach and Clear because our client felt bad after they abandoned us. And they threw us a bone. They were like, hey, you can have Breach and Clear, but you can release it on the Vita. And it's like, great, it's the Vita. Like, what are we going to do with that? So we took Breach and Clear, we released it on the Vita. It made like $10,000 in downloads or something like that. So it was like something, but not enough to keep us in business. But there was this opportunity because the Vita was a real platform. It wasn't like, mobile, which we'd previously developed for. It was like a real console platform. And it dawned on me, I could make that game physical. I could put it on a Vita cartridge, and not only would I kind of scratch this lifelong itch that I had of like having my game in a package, because that's kind of what it would take to like convince my parents that, I had a real job. I could say, look, it's a real thing. It's not, digital or whatever. But then I would also preserve this game that we had poured our life into making at that point, 3 years of our life. And I could theoretically maybe find other people that wanted to buy this as a physical thing. And that could save us. And it turned out, we were able to take that $85,000, keep the company afloat, and use a portion of that to run Breach and Clear in physical form for the Vita. And we ended up selling, I think it was all 1,800 copies, or I don't remember what our initial print run of that was, but we sold out every single copy in 108 minutes. And it instantly showed that there was a demand for these digital games in physical form, and that kicked us off into limited run games. After that, I was able to pay my credit card debt off and paid off that whole loan. Never even had to pay any of the interest on it because we got it paid back so fast, which was insane. And we started having other developers reach out. So, within a week of releasing Breach and Clear, we had Oddworld reach out. What's up?
So did you make all your money back on this one thing, or was it just like a combination of games?
So it was we did Breach and Clear first, and then within the next 3 months, part of the other $85,000, part of that was used to port Saturday Morning RPG to Vita and PS4. So we were able to run those in physical form, and the combination of Breach and Clear and Saturday Morning RPG was able to pay off the loan that I took out and my credit card debt. So by the time we got to that third release, we were just generating pure profit for the company. And that third release, was Oddworld. Oddworld is a big game from the 90s. It was one of the biggest games on the first PlayStation. And the guy who made it actually sent me an email. I was like, hey, I really like what you do. I got screwed over by a lot of the big publishers, and I haven't done physical as a result of that. So we were able to work with them and release their game physically. And then after that, I knew this guy at Epic that was kind of one of their, he would go to developers in the area and try to get them to use Unreal. This guy named Joe Kreiner. We sat down for lunch with him, completely unrelated to Limited Run. He was trying to get Mighty Rabbit to use Unreal. And I mentioned that we had released Oddworld, and he was like, well, if Oddworld's going to release it for you, we're better than Oddworld. We can do this, too. So Epic ended up doing a release through us. So, once you've got Epic on board, it's everything else just kind of falls into place after that. And since then, it's just kind of snowballed for release after release after release into these things that just I've been able to do things that I never would have in my wildest dreams expected that I could have done. And it takes so long to load that just because the breadth of stuff that we've been able to touch at this point. I've been able to do Shenmue, Scott Pilgrim, Command & Conquer, Streets of Rage, Star Wars, Metal Slug, Turok, River City, Stranger Things, Tetris, Psychonauts, Jak and Daxter, Night in the Woods, Celeste, Power Rangers. It's all these things that I love I've gotten to touch and interact with. And through doing this stuff and having published over 1,000 games at this point, I've worked with, almost all of the industry luminaries. I've worked with John Romero, Ken Williams, Roberta Williams, Cliff Bleszinski. Can't even name all the people off the top of my head. It's just at this point, I try not to get shocked when I meet these people. I was talking to the producer of Front Mission recently, this Japanese series that I loved growing up. So I don't know, it's been unreal getting to work on all of these things. A good story is my co-founder Douglas. He was at a show and he actually got to sit down and talk with Miyamoto. Getting to meet Shigeru Miyamoto is kind of a crazy thing. He just casually texts me. He's like, "Look who I'm with." I'm like, how are you just with sitting down with him? You're at a party. So apparently, he was just at a party with them, which is crazy. So I would have never believed that, 10 years ago I'd be in this spot because, when I was getting out of college, I really didn't know what I was going to do. Coming up on that, semester where I started my company, I actually went to GDC before that. And I remember being at GDC and just being overwhelmed and just feeling so small. I sat down in the Indie Game Festival Awards, and this is gonna age me, but this was the year that Minecraft was in the IGF. Can you imagine Minecraft, $1 billion thing that everyone in the world has played, and it's on this little tiny podium with one screen, like it's some kind of rinky-dink game. But I'm sitting in this auditorium with thousands of game developers, and I just feel so small and useless, thinking I'm never going to do anything in games. But here I am, 12 years later, and I've gotten to do all this crazy stuff. It's insane. And since I've made this, we actually had something really exciting happen recently, where our company was acquired by the Embracer Group, and that's pretty amazing. I never would have thought that a company that I started would ever have enough value to actually be something that somebody would want to acquire and then integrate into their own company. So I don't know, it's been a wild journey getting here, just kind of doing something I love and then having it be successful. It's been crazy. There's been a lot of hurdles and failures along the way, but you know, I wouldn't trade anything that happened because everything worked out and it's been awesome. And that's that presentation. I have my other one. This is actually a presentation that I gave to a class here 10 years ago. And I don't know how relevant this is because this was made for a programming class. So I'm just going to kind of gloss over it. And I really don't even remember half the content in here, so bear with me. And yeah, you can see like this was Mighty Rabbit, like Limited Run didn't even exist yet. And I presented it with Kurt, who is definitely not here. So let's just ignore Kurt. Bye, Kurt. Yeah, so I basically gave this presentation on taking your school project seriously. So I don't know how many of you are going to end up doing a game development project here, or you know, even if you do something in your spare time, like this can be relevant to whatever your first game ends up being. So I'm going to kind of generalize this a little bit, not necessarily focus it on a school project. And really, like, my main thing is when you make your first game, keep it focused. Because this was the big problem in my class when I did my final project is every other group didn't actually make a functioning game because they all wanted to do these insane things. And I actually like screen capped some stuff that they posted on forums. So it's kind of funny going back and reading this. You want to avoid feature creep. That's the term for basically if you want to do something like Breach and Clear Deadline, where you want to put multiplayer, procedurally generated dungeons, quests, procedurally generated loot, stats, character progression, like character customization, all that crap we had to put in Breach and Clear was feature creep. But we had to do it because we were building it for a client. And if your client doesn't understand feature creep, you just have to deal with it. But for, your first game, you really want to try to make it something you can make fast so that you can kind of get it out there and have something in your portfolio. And you don't want your first game to try to be something that Blizzard would make, Like everyone's first game idea that they have is always something that is going to be way too complicated to do the first time. So this is some actual like screen caps of people that were in my class. These were things that they wanted to do, They had 3 months to build a project. They'd never made anything in Unreal before. And they were saying they want to make a non-first person shooter game. So that is already kind of a problem because Unreal back then was like, you boot it up and like, there's already a gun. So you have to put all this effort into just taking the gun out. And then they said probably something where main character has a sword or some other melee weapon. So then you need animations for swords and melee weapons. And simultaneously can use special abilities. So you've got magic or whatever else, more stuff to program, custom characters and animation rigging. In a school project, really? Quest type system, talk to a character and get quests, really? Like this is way too complicated for a first game. And then this other class, they wanted to do multiple hits, randomly created weapons and weapon drops, customized crafted weapons like Diablo 2. Come on. No. Crazy. We actually ended up doing, a lot of work and trimming things back. Like we were asked to do enemies in our game and we were like, no, screw that. We're not doing enemies because programming that AI would take so long that we couldn't focus on the other areas of the game. So we actually just made this risky bet that if we had a functioning game, they'd forget that we didn't do the part where we were supposed to put enemies in. And that actually paid off because they never mentioned that there were no enemies in the game, which was pretty great. And my professor actually ended up hiring me after that. So I think it worked out well. But time constraints are everything when you're working on your first game or your school project. You want to build your engine strength. That's kind of what I was talking about where they wanted to take the gun out. It's like the gun's already in the engine. Make a game with a gun. Like, it's there already. And then find a genre that you feel like you can keep within your scope. So we did, a puzzle game because we felt like that would be doable in the time that we had. And this just goes back to don't do the idea you've had in your head your whole life. I'm going to kind of skim through here now because this is really, I didn't really trim the fat on this presentation. Yeah. And that's pretty much it. When you get a chance to make your first game, really focus on what it's going to be, trim it back to its core essence, and build the best thing that you can, and make a functioning game. Because when you want to get into the game industry, nothing shows your drive and desire to get in more than actually having made something that you can, show off to a potential employer. that's the presentation there. I'm going to pull up this QA thing again here so I have a background. But, I am happy to answer any questions about anything, really. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, so your retail store that opened up very recently, I was there on the opening day. What made y'all decide to make a brick and mortar store in this?
Yeah, so for limited run games, we just opened a retail store in Cary recently. That was back in April. And really, my main motivation there was I was really bored during the pandemic. I felt like super cooped up, and I wanted a chance to kind of have some face-to-face interaction when things got better again. We have kind of a weird community around limited run where it's like a big chunk are really toxic and then a big chunk are really nice, but the really nice people like don't talk. It's a lot of the really toxic people yelling at me and screaming at me and making me feel horrible all the time. But if we do these like in-person things, we get like really cool people that are nice, and it keeps you motivated and it keeps you driven. It's the same thing with like in-person events. Like I love going to GDC, E3, all these things that disappeared during the pandemic. Like I know why they had to disappear, but I felt really isolated. So that drove me to want to make this physical location that, we could hold events in, we could interact with our community, we could hold events, and we could do cool stuff around our brand. And really, it just was this fun time investment for me to kind of, focus on like these little details in the store, like the carpet. Like we have this crazy carpet in there that's like bowling alley carpet, neon lights. Like there's all sorts of crazy stuff in there. The design of it's really cool. And that's really what I spent a lot of my time during the pandemic just focusing on, because it kind of distracted me from all the other like horrors that were going on.
Yeah, I think my favorite part about that like little design thing is the 4 CRTs that are like hooked up to one another, just showing off all your games.
Yeah, that was. We have a video wall in the front, which is 4 old CRT TVs, like with a splitter, so they all form one single image, which is something that I always was fascinated by when I was a kid, because that was the only way, like, in the 90s to see big screen TV or whatever, they'd take all these TVs and stack them up, and it was like mind blowing. So I really wanted to have that in our store. And I don't know, everything about that is just this little details that help distract me from the pandemic, really. But it's been really successful so far. The store has done well. The response to it's been really positive, and we have like every day or every Friday when we open up, we have a line of like 15, 20 people waiting to get in. So that's not died down since April, which is pretty awesome.
Never mind that. I just realized my question.
Oh, okay.
So, in your experience, what's the process for getting a physical game out? How does that go in terms of getting the cartridge or disc and packaging and all that?
So it's a very multi-step process, and it kind of depends on the publisher, the platform holder, really. Sony's kind of like all-inclusive, really, where like they have a manufacturing facility that does the print, they do the assembly, they do, the disc printing. Nintendo just sends you the bulk cartridges from Japan, and then you have to coordinate through one of their authorized facilities, getting those cartridges put into cases, and then getting the print done. And Nintendo's a lot more effort than Sony. Sony's just kind of like put in your order, and then it comes in. In terms of actually formatting the games for physical, at first it was kind of difficult. And then Sony realized we were wasting a lot of their resources because we were going through these things. And every time you submit a game to Sony, you have to go through what they call format QA. Format QA is this process that takes like 5-6 days, uses a couple of their testers. They have to like very rigorously test every aspect of the game. And it's very resource intensive. And they had to do this every time we would submit a new physical game, at least when we started out. And they realized it was wasting all their resources because we were doing so many games that they should just make a new process. So they made a new process that's actually like super easy, where it's they rolled out a tool, you kind of drop your digital game in, and you're able to author a disc that way. And it's super intuitive and super easy. And then you just submit it in, and they test it for like 30 minutes, and then they're like, yep, good to go. So on the format side, it's not too hard. It's just coordinating all those physical items. And that stuff got crazy hard during the pandemic, with the supply chain issues, like boats getting backed up in ports. We had some cartridges for Doom 64, like sitting in a port for, I think, like 8 months, which was insane. They were just sitting off the coast of California, and there was nothing we could do about it. Like, people were like, make my game come faster. I'm like, I don't know what I could do. Like, I would have to, like, siege the boat or something. I don't know.
So, just starting with your experience, how, I guess, ambitious would you say your first few games should be? Like, how, story-wise, development-wise, like, little to no experience, how much effort would you say you should put into your first few games?
I would say as little as possible to make something compelling. So, if you have a compelling gameplay hook, you don't have to put a whole lot more than that. If it's an addictive game, just build it as fast as you can. The more games you can kind of get in your portfolio or get onto like an itch.io page or, up on Steam or wherever else, the, better position you're putting yourself in as a developer, both in terms of getting yourself a portfolio to present yourself to potential employers and also, generating revenue for yourself, especially if you're getting the games up on Steam. Like you have this opportunity to make money on those things, and the more catalog titles you have, the that kind of snowballs, and it'll generate money to allow you to make your bigger games, and you can kind of increase your scope as you feel comfortable increasing your budgets, really. But I would focus on smaller things first, so that you can get those things done and get them shipped. That's you.
Okay.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for coming up with an idea for a game? Like, do you think you should do things based on what your interests are when you play games, or
Yeah.
any other specific ideas?
I would absolutely pursue things that you're passionate about, not whatever the trends are. Breach and Clear Deadline was a clear case of our client pursuing the trends, because at the time, DayZ was big, Last of Us was big, Diablo was big. So he's like, I just want to do what everybody else is doing. And then by the time he shipped that game, nobody's doing that anymore. So like by the time we shipped that game, like Rust had come out, like Ark was out, people were on dinosaurs, and that made me bitter because I was pitching to them like, we got to do dinosaur games. That's the next thing. And they were like, no, nobody wants dinosaurs. But I don't recommend chasing trends, because usually you'll just get buried in a sea of other people chasing trends, which will never work out. But if you do something that you really care about, you have a chance of connecting with other people that also care about that thing. So that's going to make a more legitimate and genuine product in the end. Go to you and then you.
So you've had experience both with the development and publishing. Like with your experience with the two of those, is there one that you've liked more, or are they both just kind of hold different places?
Yeah, I like publishing because it's been a lot easier to make money publishing and keep the lights on. I like making games more because you get to see your reality, like your ideas come to life. There's something about that that's a little bit more fulfilling than just putting somebody else's game out. Like, I love that I'm getting to make a lot of other developers' dreams come true by making these things physical. And there's a lot of stuff that we've done on the physical side that have been like dreams come true for me, getting to make physical products for some of my favorite games. But there's something about like literally having an idea and then 2 years later having that idea be this playable thing that you ship out to the world and hopefully people like it. There's something about that just like it can't be matched, really. So I miss making games, but now I'm really primarily focused on the publishing side. I still have Mighty Rabbit Studios, and I didn't mention in the slide, but we still make games. So I've got about 3 people there that are still actively developing games, and they work with In Exile. So they've been working on things like Wasteland 3, Bard's Tale 4, and they're working on like this huge AAA game that hasn't been announced yet. And I kind of envy them because they get to do all these cool things, like make games happen. And I'm more on this like weird side where like I get to watch other people make games, which is kind of neat, but it's just not as like fulfilling or satisfying.
What would you say your advice is for people who get stuck frequently when programming or developing for games? Because for me personally, it's sometimes it's easy for me to hit a roadblock and then I kind of die.
Yeah. So you mean more like you hit a problem, like you can't figure out how to make something work, or is it more like you lose passion in whatever you're making, or a combination of both?
I guess a little bit of both. I do get stuck. Like I get stuck when I'm making it, but then I sort of leave it for a little bit.
Yeah.
A bit longer than I should.
I mean, I would say that, try not to walk away from something for too long. And if you're finding that that's happening frequently, like really try to brainstorm like an idea that suits what you know your knowledge is. So, if you know that you specifically can make a certain type of game, like something like Pong or whatever, just complete a game within your skill set and then put that up and gradually learn things between them that can help you build more rather than kind of diving into it and trying to learn tutorials as you go along. Because I think that kind of extrapolates your dev time and it makes it easier for you, I think, to get frustrated and walk away, at least, it would with me. I tried making some Roblox games with my daughter, and that definitely happened because I hit a lot of roadblocks and I was like, I don't really care anymore. It's just easy to lose enthusiasm, when you hit those roadblocks and you can't make it work after a while. It's just like, whatever. So I would say focus on smaller things, and then in between making those things, maybe like look at tutorials for building other types of games, and then take that knowledge and apply it into building your own similar games until you've built enough of a knowledge where you feel comfortable tackling a game that kind of blends a lot of that knowledge together.
So, I guess talking about the resume side of things, would you say that mods or any existing kind of like ROM hacks and such, how does that look on a resume compared to a full I developed my own game kind of thing?
I mean, I think that looks good. Like one of the guys that I knew growing up, one of his primary things that he did was hack old Nintendo games. He would do ROM hacks. And now he runs his own game company making NES games. Like he makes brand new NES games. He made Jay and Silent Bob Mall Brawl for my company. And now he's working on a bunch of other new licensed NES games, which is kind of a crazy turn of events. Like this was just a dude I knew back in 2001 who did ROM hacks, and he found something that really suited his skills. So really it kind of depends on what role you want to get into. Like I think if you're applying for a lead engineer position on a major AAA game, ROM hacks might not necessarily work for it. But my company, we do a lot of stuff with old ROMs, and things come up within that pillar that something like that would be super applicable to. So yeah, I would say for certain roles it holds just as much weight.
What's the favorite game you've shipped to limited run?
Ooh, yeah. So for me, it's Shadow Complex. That's the game that we did with Epic. Shadow Complex was the first game that I ever downloaded where I was like, man, I really wish I had this on a disc. And that was in maybe 2008 or so. And I just remember playing it going, I wish I could own this thing, because a lot of the problems with digital games and why people are so passionate about getting them in a packaged form is they can be delisted and removed from the marketplace, like Ubisoft just did with a whole bunch of titles on Steam. The publishers can just decide at any point, oh, we don't want this game to be available anymore. And they can literally pull it out of your library. Even if you paid for it, you just can't play it anymore. But if you've got it on a disc, Ubisoft's never going to run in and take your disc and stomp on it or whatever. It's protected in the sense that it's your property and you can run it as long as your platform doesn't break. And Shadow Complex was the first game that I played, and I was like, man, I wish I had this in a form where I knew I could own it forever. So getting to do that as our 13th release or something was insane. It was this hugely validating thing for me that, that everything had come full circle at that point. And I kind of didn't feel like it could be topped. But then, we did stuff like Star Wars, which is just this big satisfying thing to me as a kid growing up with that.
This is just me not knowing some stuff, but how can they take your game? If it's an online game, it makes sense, but how can they take your game off if you paid for it? Because isn't it downloaded to your system or whatever?
So
how can they,
if you've already downloaded it, you're still able to run it. But if you had it just waiting on your Steam account, waiting to install, they can remove it at any point because of the licensing agreement that you've signed with Steam. So when you make your account with them or you sign those EULAs, most of the time you're saying you agree and acknowledge that at any point they can pull this away, that they're just giving you a license to play this thing. And
is that just a Steam thing?
it's basically anytime you get something digitally. If you get a movie digitally from Amazon, if you get a movie or a song digitally from iTunes, all of those things can be removed at the publisher's behest.
I'm more asking
If you download it, you're safe if you don't need Steam to launch it. Because if you need Steam to actually launch it, you're still going to be in trouble because Steam will actually remove it from your library. You literally won't be able to like click on the thing where the launch button is.
Okay, yeah, I was just really confused because the way you made it sound
Yeah.
like just
Thankfully, they can't like actually go on your hard drive and remove it that way.
yeah, that's something I was
but
worried about. Like, how could they do that?
yeah, but we all know like computers will fail eventually, and you know when you get a new system, you won't be able to install it on your new system, and that's where the problem kind of lies.
This is kind of a specific example, but how did y'all get like Scott Pilgrim? Because that's an infamous like takedown. Where
Yeah, so that
you
was
not access the game at all.
that was the most complicated thing that we've ever pulled off. So I actually started chasing Turok because Turok was owned by NBC Universal, who owns the rights to Scott Pilgrim. Universal put out the movie Scott Pilgrim, and Ubisoft licensed it from them. So the only reason Ubisoft ever pulled it down was because Universal, canceled their licensing agreement, which caused them to have to remove it. So we went to Universal, managed to convince them to do Turok, made them a lot of money on Turok, and they were like, hey, we really want to work with you on other things. And they were like, what else would you want to do? And I was like, Scott Pilgrim. And they were like, really? Scott Pilgrim? Why would you want to do that? And I was like, well, it's the most requested thing that we've had since we started. And they kind of scoffed a little bit, but said they'd look into it. And then Ubisoft reached out to me this was like a year and a half later, and they were like, hey, we're, bringing this back. And I was like, whoa, are you serious? And he was like, and NBC Universal wants you to work with us on it. So doing that thing with Turok and then talking to NBC Universal managed to get Ubisoft to actually consider bringing it back. And then it kind of came back to us, but then Ubisoft was like, other publishers are also trying to get the rights to this, so you have to pitch on it. So we pitched on it. Ubisoft was like, yeah, we really like you guys the most. We're going to give it to you. And then the other publisher that was pitching on it made a really public stink about it. And it caused Brian Lee O'Malley, the creator of Scott Pilgrim, to say something about it because the other publisher posted something false. They were like, oh, Ubisoft isn't talking to us about it or something. I don't know. They were. But then Brian Lee O'Malley was kind of like, Universal needs to give it to them. So then Universal was like, okay, Brian Lee O'Malley is really upset. Like, we're going to have to give it to the other publisher, even though we want to work with you. And then we were like, well, give us a chance to talk to Brian. So then we talked to Brian, and we had to kind of convince him to work with us. Show him that, we really cared about it, and we were passionate about Scott Pilgrim, the game, the brand. That was crazy. Then we had to get Anamanaguchi on our side, the musicians for it, because they were also doing a very public thing. And we had never really had a chance to talk to them because, we're in North Carolina and nobody lives here around us, So we had to talk to them and Brian and get everybody on the same page and show them hey, we're genuine people. We really care about what we do. We're not just in it for the money. And after that, after all of them were happy, Universal was like, okay, we're clear. You're good. And then we got it and we were able to release it, which was amazing. And now I kind of have this obsession with trying to revive these long lost games. That's kind of my passion pursuit now, is finding games that are kind of in licensing hell and then figuring out how to bring them back. So I'm focused on a lot of crazy stuff that people really want to come back right now, and I'm hoping, I'm 50% of the way there on some of them. So I have hopes. I don't know. It's fun. I think you've raised your hand a couple times now. I'll go to you, and then you, and then anybody in the back.
I wanted to ask, have you tried doing any games, making physical games, the games that say haven't released in North America or never got?
Yeah, so
or older games that never got physical releases.
One of the things that we started building at Limited Run during the pandemic was an engine called the Carbon Engine. I had this idea because we work with a lot of developers that did emulation on modern platforms, and the way that they would do it is, they would build emulation for one project, and then when they went to the next project, they would start from scratch again. They were never building a reusable solution that could be applied from project to project to project, which would, compound over time and reduce your dev times. So they always had these high budgets, and those high budgets would keep publishers like Konami from re-releasing a lot of their back catalog, because they're like, we're not going to pay, $400,000 to re-release, this obscure game. But I wanted to tear the barriers down and say like, hey, not only do you not have to pay $400,000, like we will pay you to port your game to modern platforms. So we built this Carbon engine tech to re-release classic games on modern platforms. And the second title we released was actually something called River City Girls Zero, which was a Japanese Super Famicom game that had never come over to the United States, called like Kunio Tachi no Banka. And I think it's like the hot-blooded Kunio-kun is what it translates to roughly or something. But it had never come over here. So we actually worked with somebody to ROM hack translation in, do a whole bunch of changes to the gameplay. And then on the Carbon engine side, we actually added like new animated cutscenes, voiceovers, a lot of modern features, and finally brought this game over. You know, it had been sitting in Japan since 1994 and finally came to the US in 2020. Is that this year that it released? I can't remember if it was like January this year or 2021. I don't know. Ever since the pandemic, like time is just this like weird
Is that
nebulous
the
concept.
River City Ransom series? Is that like a sequel to River City Ransom?
Yeah, so Kunio Tachi no Banka was actually like the, I think, third game in the actual River City Ransom beat 'em up series. So there were a whole bunch of other ones like sports ones and random other ones that were kind of like, you know, part of the series but not connected to Ransom. River City Girls, which our partners at WayForward had released, was super popular and had actually kind of eclipsed River City Ransom a little bit in its popularity. And we were looking for potential ways to expand that series while utilizing Carbon. And we noticed like the girls in that actually debuted in Kunio Tachi no Banka. So it was an opportunity to like bring that over and tie it to a franchise that people were super excited about. It worked out because it actually sold really well, and you know it reviewed well despite the fact that it was a 1994 beat 'em up. You know, we were all nervous like, how's a game from 1994 going to review in 2022? And it did well, you know, considering. I think you next.
So, I've had, well, okay, sorry, I'm kind of like breaking out over here, but I've liked to mess around with video games like since like middle school, right? I've been going on experimenting, but I've never really tried to make a full game. I'll get these ideas for like some specific mechanic, and like after school, after I do my homework, I'll go home, I'll code it all, and over like a week, I'll try and like refine it, and then I'm done. And then I go on to the next idea. But now I have an idea for like an actual full game. But obviously, with college classes, clubs, you know, all these things going around surrounding college life, it's a little harder to find time to go out and, you know, just code all of that stuff, start working on it. So when you make games, what's kind of your workflow? Like, how much time do you like dedicate a week to it, maybe a day to it? Like, what's kind of the time commitment that you have to doing this kind of things?
Well, thankfully, since it's my job, I get paid to do it, which is awesome. So I get to dedicate all my time to it. But when I was, you know, in college trying to juggle, you know, classes and then Epic, you know, they basically treated it like a full-time job and it was difficult. So I totally feel you on that. I would say, you know, one of the things you could do is if there are a bunch of other people that want to work on games, you know, you could come together and collaborate on a game. And you could work on it slowly throughout your time in college, not really like rush on it or whatever, but you know, just work on it in your spare time and not like stress about it. And if you connect with other people, it could make it easier because you could have other people helping you in aspects that maybe you're weak on. You know, if you don't like programming certain systems, if you prefer gameplay rather than, you know, UI, like it takes a very special person to like programming menus. And that's not me. I like making the gameplay happen, but I've got somebody at my company who loves making menus work, which is crazy that somebody actually likes that. So you just need to find people that complement you and will want to maybe do the things that you don't want to do so you can focus on the stuff that you like, and then you can put less time into it. And it makes a bigger project more manageable because you've got less of an active time commitment in it versus what you would have if you tried to bite it all off yourself.
So just find people to kind of split up the whole idea into
Yeah, that's the way that I would look at it. At least while you're in college. When you get out of college, it's really up to you if you want to pursue making games as your career. If you want to make indie games, at that point you kind of have to put everything into it because once you're out of college, you're looking at it like this is going to be how I make money. So at that point, it's like you got to treat it like a 9 to 5, and it's still fun, but at that point, that's the point where you have to look at it as a revenue generating opportunity. But you also might get out of college and say, oh, I want to work at, an actual game developer and get paid there. And if that's the case, you find other people there, and in your free time, you can still work on games. Most game companies are pretty free with, if you want to make games in your spare time, you still have the ability to do that. They're totally fine with it as long as you disclose it, so they don't get, surprised or think that you're building it on company time. But most of the people I know that work in games, they get home and they might spend, an hour or two a day or, a couple hours a week making fun projects in their off time. And they do it together collaboratively. And eventually over time, they build something cool.
Thank you.
I think you had a question.
Yeah, I actually have
Two.
The first one is, what is your moonshot for, you said you like rescuing games and licensing hell. What's your moonshot? Like one that you think is probably unattainable, but you're going to try to shoot for it anyways.
So, my 2 dream games that I really want to do are the X-Men and Simpsons arcade games. They're beat 'em ups, and Marvel is so popular right now that they're basically impossible to get to pay attention to anything. So it's pretty much a moonshot. Even though we work with Disney and Disney owns Marvel, and we've worked on Star Wars. Me growing up, I never would have thought, I could work on Star Wars, but not X-Men. But it's kind of like that right now because Marvel's so big that it's like, re-releasing this old arcade game. Why? So I would say that, and probably Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Basically anything from Capcom because Capcom's been really hard to work with too. We actually, not a lot of people know this, but in 2017 we were actually real close to releasing about 10 games with Capcom. And at the time, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite had come out, and it was kind of a disaster almost, and Capcom was looking for a lot of ways to generate revenue. But then they released Monster Hunter World, and it made a gajillion dollars, and they were like, we don't need you anymore. And everything just kind of fizzled out, and since then, we've not been able to get anything going discussion-wise with them, so that's it's kind of a dream partner. I have a lot of these. I could probably ramble forever, because also anything from Square Enix, basically. We've not done anything with them except European stuff. And all the exciting stuff is Japanese. So yeah, if I could do Final Fantasy VII on Switch, getting to do a cool collector's edition for that would be kind of a dream come true for childhood me. Or, God, real moonshot, I guess, would be Nintendo.
Mother 3, maybe?
Yeah. That's such a moonshot that it's not even, it doesn't even dawn on me because I'm yeah, it's not, it's Nintendo. That's never going to happen. But, crazy things happen every now and then. And, like I said, Douglas was sitting down with Shigeru Miyamoto, and it's it just takes a random encounter with the right person, seeing what we're doing, and then going oh, we could be somewhere weird. And then Reggie's there, and then Reggie's oh, let me refer you to Doug Bowser. And then Doug Bowser could be yeah, sure, Mother 3, whatever. Reggie said it's a good idea. So who knows? It could happen. Weird things happen to me all the time like that, and cool things kind of pan out. So I don't know. But yeah, in my head, I guess that's the biggest moonshot because I don't even think about it at this point. It's no way, that's never going to happen. But that would be amazing.
Yeah, that leads pretty well into my next question, which was what's your best piece of business advice for someone looking to get into the games industry?
Do you mean in terms of starting your own company or, just wanting to maybe work somewhere else?
I think in just general of taking care of yourself and doing what's best. I don't know if starting your own business would be just too different from working somewhere else to give meaningful advice, but
for starting your own business, you just have to be prepared to hit a lot of failures and roll with those punches. It's difficult. The first thing you do is likely not going to be a success. So you have to go into it planning for it to be a failure. When we released Saturday Morning RPG, we all sat around and had this really stupid discussion. We were when we get all this money, we're going to do this. Everyone's talking about all the crazy things they were going to buy. And then our day one sales were $30,000. And it's like, yeah, we're not buying Ferraris on that. Because like your day one sales, it's like sharp decline from there. So it's like that basically imputes that we would have gotten like 150K maybe lifetime from that. That's over the course of years. And we had a team of like 8 people at the time. Yeah, it wasn't going to happen. And it didn't even dawn on us at the time that instead of having this conversation about what we're going to do when we're successful, we should have been having a conversation about what we were going to do when we weren't. So I would say, you know, if you start your own business, if that's a route you're going, like always plan for your product to fail. So that's in your back pocket so that you know, like, hey, when this fails, this is what we roll on to. This is what I do next. And that can keep you going. But if you have a product fail and you are planning on that being successful, you have nothing to roll into. And that's where a lot of studios hit a wall and end up closing. There was actually one of my presentations that I dug up yesterday because I like went through my inbox and like dug up all my old PowerPoints. I found one that had this like game developer map of North Carolina, of the Wake County area from 2012. And I went through and I was like pointing at every one of them that went out of business. And it was like 70% of them are out of business. It's crazy. Like it's so brutal, but they were all these like ambitious mobile developers that maybe had one success, but then they never planned for anything else to be a failure. And that mindset always works against you. So that's my advice there. But if you're just looking out like to get a job, my advice would be to start small. Don't look to jump in as the lead designer of a project. Like that's likely not going to happen. The other thing is, there's no such thing as an idea guy. There's a delusion that there's somebody at a company that just kind of comes up with an idea for a game. And there's no such thing as that. There's a designer, but the designer does a lot of things where it's like, tweaking the game code to like make a gun feel better or whatever. Like the designer's not just the guy who goes, we're going to make a game with guys and they have chainsaw guns and that's it, go make it. Like, and then he gets paid for the next 4 years while everybody else makes the game. Like some people think that's real, but it's not. So, and I'm not saying that you think that's real. That's just a more general thing because I run into it a lot. There's, tell people I make games and they're like, oh, I've got a great idea for a game. And I'm like, I'm sure you do.
It's
we all
open
do.
World MMORPG where you have all the powers that you can imagine.
So yeah, I would say like plan to enter small on the programming side. You're probably going to be, like a junior gameplay developer, a junior systems developer, something like that. Or, you can even go smaller and do what I did and start in QA. A lot of people start in QA, whether you're an artist. I worked next to this dude. I think his name is Josh Marlowe now, but he was Josh Keller at the time. And he was in test with me. He was just a QA dude, and he progressed to be one of the art directors on Fortnite. So, just going from QA guy to art director on Fortnite, not a bad trajectory, right? Like, so you can start small and then grow big. And some of those small roles are, available with no experience. Like I basically had no experience going into it. Most experience I had was I wrote some tutorials for Wake Tech's game classes. Like that's all I really had when I applied. And I got the job because they felt that I had passion for making games and that I had passion for, doing a good job. And it worked out. I hated it just because, it was 13-hour days, 7 days a week while you're in college. I'm sure you can imagine, like, it's brutal. And I think at the time, that's a junior course load. So that was not fun classes. It wasn't like, garbage final semester of senior class, like, classes, like the PE class you left off until the end of the thing. It was like linear algebra, assembly programming. Like I think those were 2 classes I was taking. It was horrible.
They did me dirty with assembly. They made me take it, and the year after I took it, they said it wasn't required anymore.
Wow. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I don't remember what else I was doing. Maybe discrete math too. I don't remember. It was. Yeah, it was miserable balancing that with doing AAA dev. But start small, look into potential options now if you can. I mean, if you find like a QA job or something you can take like when you actually have time, like summer break or something like that, it's like it's good experience. And I would say if you're looking to break in the game industry, network with as many people as you can, because that's really the key thing that's helped me out is that I've taken a lot of opportunities to meet people as I was growing in games. And every time I fell, there was always somebody that I could reach out to who'd pick me back up. And that is super helpful. So, never write somebody off. If there's somebody that you they haven't done anything or whatever, don't underestimate that maybe someday they're going to be the next, Kojima or something, they could make something big. You just don't know.
I just have a question, and this kind of goes for just networking in general. Like when you're doing this and meeting people, I assume you're not keeping up with them all the time, but you just remember their name.
No, you just kind of remember when you meet somebody, you basically remember who they are, what they do, and some of them you see at a lot of events. So it's one of the guys that helped me the most was this guy named Randy Greenback, who's a local guy, big dude, bushy red hair, beard, and he wears this little newsboy cap. Once you see Randy, you will see Randy everywhere at every game event. And he was actually the creator of the Friday the 13th game. He got a little bit downplayed on that, but he was the main creative force of that game. The reason it exists is because he pitched it as this game called Summer Camp that became Friday the 13th. And every time we hit a wall, I was able to reach out to Randy, and he was like, "Oh, I got something for you," and he would connect us with another opportunity. And I kept up with him by seeing him at events. It was that simple. I didn't have to stay in touch with him every day. It was every few months I'd see him somewhere, and I'd just be like, "Hey, Randy, what's up? What's new?" And we'd catch up, and that's basically it. It's just a matter of kind of.
So it's just a matter of when you see them, talk to them more, and
Yeah, just get to know your peers, get to know the people around you. It's not super valuable when you go to GDC and you go to a party where everyone's drunk, because that'll happen. Half the party, half the networking at GDC, the big game developer conference in San Francisco, happens at the parties after the show. And most people there are drunk and they'll have no idea who you are the next day. But then sometimes you will have meaningful interactions at those. I keep mentioning Fortnite because it's everybody I know ended up working on Fortnite. But I was at this party at GDC 2011 or something, and this student was there, and he was like, "Oh, I'm finishing up my senior year. I have no idea what I'm going to do." It was this guy, I think he's Chris Marino is his name. And he was like, "Oh, I do animation." And I was like, "Well, yeah, we're doing 2D games. We have nothing for animation right now, but I hope you find something." And I kind of kept up with him over the years, and turns out he's the lead animator on Fortnite now. So it's another one of those things where it's don't underestimate people, because this dude was just a student that I ran into at this random party at GDC. And that wasn't even a party I was invited to. Most of GDC parties are just stumbling into parties you weren't invited to and then kind of networking, at least when you go there for your first time. Or if you go there as an indie developer nobody knows. It's a little easier now. I actually get invited to parties now, but back then, no, I just uninvited all the time, just walking to parties. But yeah, I'd meet people there, and it would.
No one turned you away. So.
No, there's too many people at GDC. They can't keep track of it, unless they have wristbands or passes. But most of the parties don't. They're just kind of open. But yeah, just network with people as much as you can. Meet whoever you can, because you never know where they're going to end up or who you're going to talk to. It's always a surprise.
We have a question from the Twitch chat, actually.
Ooh.
So Panther Dev is asking, with Indian student development projects, people tend to wear a lot of different hats. Someone ends up doing tech art and level design and gameplay programming. Whereas large studios, usually they're broken up into you're the guy that programs the way hair moves or something really specific. So do you have any advice on how to make that switch from broad skills to being concentrated to make yourself valuable to a AAA company?
Yeah, so I never actually did that myself. I've always been a guy that wears way too many hats. Even at Limited Run, when we started it out, I was doing marketing, I was doing the physical product ordering, the physical product engineering, I was doing business development. I've always worn 5,000 hats, so I've never been one to be super specialized, but I'm super aware that at EA Tiburon, where they make Madden, there's a dude who programs grass physics. Really? How do you get good in that? You literally program the friction of their cleats against grass, different types of grass. How do you even know that knowledge that goes into that. And I guess really it would just be like, you would only really get into those specific roles, I think, as you grow in those companies. That would be my assumption, at least. Like, I don't think anybody gets hired out the gate as like the grass guy at EA Tiburon. I think that the grass guy started as a general gameplay programmer, like somebody who was just implementing gameplay systems. And as he specialized, people said, oh, this guy's got a knack for physics. And then they kind of moved him into those things. I think there are some less broad specializations that you can kind of immediately focus on, like engine programming, I think is fairly an obvious thing. Like, you know, if you want to do engine programming, learn how to do low-level coding. Like, that will make you valuable for that. If you want to do graphics programming, it's kind of a similar thing. But then any of these specialized gameplay system things, I think it stems out of somebody coming on as a general programmer and then specializing as they grow in the company. I think I'm going to go him and then you.
So you mentioned, you know, you always talk to people and say you're a game developer, and everybody's got so many ideas. But what advice do you have for people who sort of struggle with the whole idea of what sort of game they want to make and sort of cultivating that creativity where they've got more ideas to work on?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you've got a lot of ideas, you really have to find one that excites you the most and then just try to push yourself to focus on it and then learn how to make that game happen. And just going back to my earlier comments, just try to make that first game that you do. It doesn't have to be something you're not passionate about, but try to make sure it's something that is manageable, that you can actually tackle as your, you know, first game project or your second one or your third. Like, don't tackle your biggest, grandest ideas until you know that you can make them. Because otherwise you're going to get burned out and then you're going to get, you know, disillusioned about making games. One of the things that happened with like the students that posted those things on those forums, like all of them work at like Red Hat and like all these super boring companies. Like when I talk to them, I like, it just sounds like I'm listening to like a fan running or whatever, because they're just talking to me about like databases and regular expressions and all this boring stuff. I think like 90% of my graduating class went to work at NetApp. So they were like announcing at the graduation, like, you know, where everyone was working, and they like Josh Fairhurst, Mighty Rabbit Studios. Like everyone like, what? What is that? But everybody else was NetApp, NetApp, NetApp. And what happened was they had these giant ideas for their game projects and they didn't pan out. And then they were like, I hate game development. And they had all these ambitions going into it and they threw them to the wind because they bit off more than they could chew and tackled something that just couldn't be tackled for a student project. And it made them feel overwhelmed and disillusioned. So start small, make something cool with that. And then I think if it's something, an idea that you had that you're passionate about, you'll still be happy with it even if it's small. And then you can build that out into your bigger ideas. Does that make sense? Cool.
So this is like a very specific question, but I saw on like I think the previous or like 2 slides we had a Genesis port of Streets of Rage 4.
Yeah, so that was actually just a packaging thing we did. So I am a huge Sega fanboy, so I am always trying to convince them to work with me, but there's this very Japanese thing where they're like, oh, you know, if we made a game, we need to publish it ourselves. And it's always this huge hurdle. Like it took me, I think, 4 years to convince SNK to work with us. Then it took me like 5 years to get Konami on board. So it's always this constant thing with Sega. It's like every opportunity I get, I try to do something with them to convince them to work with us. So for Streets of Rage, I licensed the Sega Genesis brand so that we could put it on the packaging to make something that felt like the packaging from the older games, to kind of have a cool throwback in that product to the older packaging. And we actually made like an oversized clamshell case that felt like the old Genesis cases that a PlayStation 4 case could go inside of. One of the things that I love doing is making boxes that hold other boxes for some reason. Like, I do that all the time. It's like this thing where it's like, I heard you like boxes, so I made boxes to go in your boxes. But to me, it's cool to have this packaging that harkens back to like nostalgic things like the Genesis case or whatever. So having a case in a case, like it's redundant, but it's kind of neat. I don't know.
Yeah, the coolest thing to do on top of that is what they've also been doing with the Star Wars releases of having the old system as well in there. So like for the cartridge, so like for I don't know Empire Strikes Back, it's just a red translucent NES cartridge that works on the NES, and I don't know, I just find it cool that you're like also like making these games for older consoles as well.
Yeah, so we did actually on Genesis. We did Zombies Ate My Neighbors. So and Disney's actually been really good about working with their back catalog. So they have this very large back catalog that they realize is kind of dormant, and some of those games are valuable. Like Zombies Ate My Neighbors, if you wanted to buy a used copy of that on Super Nintendo, it was like $50, and that's just the cartridge alone, none of the packaging. So there's an opportunity there to bring it back into print, so that people can actually kind of buy a boxed version of it for an affordable price rather than go on eBay and pay $150 for it in a box. And Disney recognized that and kind of reached out to us. It was a funny story. This happened in like 2018, right after Solo came out. And Disney sent an email. They're like, hey, we want to work with you on some Star Wars stuff. And my co-founder's response, like he sent this an email before I could write anything, was, wow, did Solo do that bad? Because he's like, why would you reach out to us? But he sent that to them. And I was like, oh, God, why would you send that to Disney? But thankfully, that didn't immediately turn them away. They thought it was funny. So we had a meeting with them, and they were like, yeah, we actually want to work with you on Star Wars stuff, which was super hard for me to believe, but it panned out. It was awesome.
I don't know how, mine is kind of a two-part question. I don't know how much you can say about the first part, but how did like the Embracer acquiring come about?
So the Embracer thing is also kind of a funny story. My co-founder has a habit of just saying things. He has no filter. That's what's great. I am kind of this more businessy guy when we go to events, but then he's the guy that just kind of like walks around and makes friends with everyone. Like I hate wandering up to people and like going into conversations I wasn't invited into. Like I'm good at having conversations when I know that people want to have conversations with me. Like, if there's somebody who's not actively in a conversation, I'll walk up and say hi and we'll talk or whatever. But like Douglas, my co-founder, will walk up to a group of like 4 people having a conversation already and like join in, which is how he probably ended up with Shigeru Miyamoto. I'm sure Miyamoto didn't want to talk to him, but Douglas would just walk up and be like, I have no shame. Sure, why not? I'll talk to him. But Douglas did this thing. I think Embracer had acquired something at the time, and he tweeted like, man, you should buy us next. And then, like, within 5 minutes, the guy who owns Embracer was in Douglas's DM saying, like, are you serious about this? Like, let's talk. And it turns out the guy who owns Embracer, it's not surprising because they acquire so many companies. For those who don't know, Embracer is a game company that was originally known as THQ Nordic, and before that, Nordic Games. So they were Nordic Games, and they would do like these adventure games, like small things for like the boxed PC market. Then they bought THQ and a lot of the rights to their games when they went out of business. And now Embracer has 11 pillars, and there's like THQ, Deep Silver, Dark Horse Comics. I can't even remember. I should know these things as a member of one of the pillars. And then Free Mode, Coffee Stain Studios, who did like Goat Simulator, have their own pillar. But Embracer owns Saber is another one. Saber Interactive. They just did the Evil Dead game. So they own like 300 companies. So it wasn't surprising to learn that the guy who owns Embracer is a collector, and he's like a big game collector. So he was already following our company. So when Douglas tweeted that thing, like he was following Douglas. We didn't even know it. So he just messaged him and he says, hey, are you serious about this? And then we ended up meeting with him at GDC. And he was actually serious about acquiring the company. This was 2017 or 2018, I think. I can't remember which one of those years. But I mean, this took a while to happen. There was a point at which it felt like, we weren't going to get the value that we wanted out of it. So we stepped back and we were like, hey, we'll prove out, like, we're going to do some of these things and execute on some of the revenue goals that we have. And we did that and came back to them and they were like, okay, yeah, let's talk. Let's do it. And then a year and a half later, it panned out and happened, which is awesome. We just closed that deal it was August 18th. Yeah, August 18th. So it's been about a month and a half now, which is crazy. But yeah, it's been great because now we have through that access to a lot of studios and resources that we didn't. Basically, we have like I don't want to say like an infinite well of funding that we can tap into, but like if a project crosses our plate that we want to do, we can kind of go up to the top of Embracer and say, hey, here's our pitch. Like, can we get the $3 million or whatever we need to fund this thing? So now we can do some pretty ambitious projects. We work with a company a lot called Tribute Games. They just released Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, which is an amazing game. And these guys are kind of stuck in this rut of working with publishers because they can't find independent funding. And now we can kind of help them break out of that and like independently make games like Shredder's Revenge so they can keep more of the revenue for themselves, which will be great. Like that's one of the opportunities we're provided is that funding to help our partners out and to help basically make more cool games exist, which is great. And then Embracer also owns a bunch of game IP. Like they just bought Tomb Raider and they bought Lord of the Rings. So like, you know, if we want to do something with Tomb Raider or Lord of the Rings, like, you know, we can go straight to the source, which is awesome. So it's good. It's awesome.
The second part of the question was like, when like acquired by a big company like that, how does that relationship kind of work?
So with Embracer, it's actually really nice because they basically believe in independent operations. So they only acquire companies that aren't in need of like somebody to come in and like rescue them. Like they don't acquire companies that are running in the negative or, you know, in a bad state. Like they acquire companies that have positive cash flow, that have strong leaders, good entrepreneurs at the helm. So they can basically just leave them alone because they just kind of let us do our thing. Like there's no, like they didn't install some like Swedish guy at our, because they're a Swedish company. So there's not some like weird guy like sitting in the corner of our company telling us what to do now. Like we're able to do what we want and keep running the company independently and pursue all the projects that we want to do. So it's been great so far because we're basically operating exactly the way we were before. You know, nothing's changed. I can still do crazy things. Because that's one of the things I do. If you don't have a lot of context for limited run, one of the other things that I like to do is really stupid stuff. I acquired the rights to like the worst game of all time during the pandemic, Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. I dedicated like a year to trying to figure out who had the rights to that, and then I tracked it down and bought the rights to re-release it. And I don't think any major Embracer's $1 billion company, and what's amazing is they wouldn't stop me from doing something like that. And any other $1 billion company would, because they would be like, we don't want to own the rights to Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. But now whether they like it or not, they do own it, so it's funny. It was just a random guy who had like worked on the game back in the day. Like he was selling like health, like diet nutrient products or something. Like I tracked him down because he had a copyright on his like health nutrient system, and I was able to find the email address on that. I emailed that, and thankfully, like that health nutrient system email address was still active. And then he wrote back. He was like, "Why would you want Plumbers Don't Wear Ties?" And he was like happy that somebody wanted to buy it, so it worked out.
Because you really felt like wasting some money.
I really felt like wasting money, and I kind of had this belief that there's value in preserving bad games too. Like, and something about bad games that's also interesting is like everyone in the world knows Mother 3, like the best games that everybody wants. Everyone in the world knows those, but they also know the terrible games. And I'm not going to be able to get Mother 3. But I can get these terrible games that everybody knows about. And there's something fun about these terrible games to me because it's so unexpected. Like, nobody would expect me to, like, get the rights to Plumbers Don't Wear Ties or re-release E.T. if I ever felt like doing that. Which actually, I tried, and Steven Spielberg said, no, why would I ever want to do that? So, probably never going to happen from anybody. And somebody said Superman 64, and I would also do that one if I had the opportunity. WB is weird right now. So again, full disclosure, I've tried to re-release Superman 64. And WB is just such a mess right now that we can't license anything basically from them because they're doing that merger thing.
What about Night Trap? How did you land that, and how did you release it?
Yeah, Night Trap was a weird thing. So the guys who do My Life in Gaming on YouTube, they had come to our office to film a documentary, and they, went back, and after like 2 months, I think we had been since we talked to them. They sent me an email like, "Hey, we just ran into this guy. He said he's remastering Night Trap, and would you want to talk to him?" I'm like, yes, I want to talk to him. And turns out that this guy Tyler Hogle, I think he's in Kentucky, had the rights to remaster it. He had managed to track down Tom Zito, the founder of Digital Pictures, and convince him to let him re-release Night Trap. And he was just one guy doing this re-release, and he was like super gung-ho about doing a physical release with us, and that was exciting to me. And we both kind of thought, hey, this game's horrible. It's horrible in this like charming way. Like it's got a B-movie appeal to it, but we were both like, this game's on most of the worst games of all time list, so there won't be that much demand for it. So we agreed like 4,000 units, that'll be enough, because this was back when we weren't doing pre-orders, it was just hard limits. And we did 4,000 units, and I think they sold out in like a fraction of a second. And that was the worst day of my life because my Twitter DMs were just filled with death threats and angry things. And I feel so bad for one of my employees, Emily, was my customer support rep at the time. And she was just bombarded with the worst stuff. And then some really funny stuff, too. I think somebody called her, and excuse my language, a fucking walnut. I don't even know what that means, but that was a quote that somebody sent to her because she couldn't give them a copy of Night Trap because we only had 4,000 and they sold out like that.
That's so funny to me because if you don't know what Night Trap is, it's one of the main games that led to the introduction of the ESRB system. It was talked about in Congress for like months on end when it released.
The other funny thing is, after that game came out, so previously to Night Trap, we had never had an ESRB rating on any of our releases. So we did about 60 releases with no ESRB rating. Sony was like, "This is fine, we don't care." But then Night Trap came out, and suddenly the ESA noticed, and they started bombarding Sony and saying, like, "Why are you allowing this? Why are you allowing this?" And then Sony was like, "We don't allow this anymore." So we had to start getting ESRB ratings because of that. But Night Trap's been fun because the other part about it, it was in Congress, and Howard Lincoln goes on record, this lawyer for Nintendo.
I had to watch that whole congressional.
He goes on record and very confidently states Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system, and then in 2018 we released it on Nintendo Switch, which was great. It's like this nice full circle thing. Yeah.
I love it.
Have you ever heard of one of the rarest PS4 games, which basically rip off your logo?
Which game?
Poop Slinger.
Oh, Poop Slinger, limited rare. Yes, I am very familiar with limited rares. So, on April 1st, I think 2018 or 2019, a company called Limited Rare showed up and purported to be this Russian offshoot. Like their website looked like a scam, and you could click a button to order this copy of a game called Poop Slinger, which was a real PS4 game. And most people thought it was going to be a scam because the price of the game was changing every like hour. Like the price was going up and down, and then they were tweeting like broken English stuff all day. And then by the end of the day, they were like, "We went out of business. Like this will never be available again. Like sorry." And nobody knew if they were going to get their games, and they ended up sending them out. So another thing they did, like they started off, they had our logo. We contacted them, we're like, "Hey, you can't have this logo." And then they switched to having a knockoff of another publisher's logo. And that stayed up for a little while. And like 3 hours later, it changed to a third logo. So it was an interesting day. But they ended up shipping the game. And only 84 of them sold. And now they sell for $10,000 on eBay, which is crazy. And it's literally one of the worst games on PlayStation 4. You throw poop at people. And the graphics are bad, and the gameplay is bad. Everything about it is bad.
And now it's one of the rarest games of all time.
It is, correct. Yeah. So I've definitely kept on top of that. Now there's another company who's actually not the same company that is called Limited Rare, And they're also doing similar things where like they just did something where you had to buy an NFT to get a physical game. I didn't do that. Like they're making people jump through like these painful hoops to get games because they just think it's funny. It's like it's all a troll.
That is fair.
It's
Funny is fair.
There's no NFTs, so I'm not sure about that.
It's fun that they exist, but great that they don't.
Yeah.
All right, you are up.
I was gonna ask, this wouldn't be for a few months, but would I be able to possibly get a job at Limited Run?
Yeah, so I have cards here. So anybody that wants cards, this is the first time I've actually remembered to bring cards to a thing. So I have cards. Yes, so we're pretty frequently hiring, whether it's for, I mean, it's usually like a variety of roles. So we don't have a lot of like active development roles usually, but right now we have two. We're looking for a Windows application developer and then a UI artist. So that's for Carbon Engine. Those are those classic games that we're re-releasing on modern platforms. So that job's open, but we're constantly hiring like shipping, inventory, marketing, art, so like packaging design, things like that. Production is a big need that we have. So like we're going to be expanding more and more as time goes on. So yeah, if you keep your eyes open, like we hired maybe like 20 people last year. So we went from like ending the year with 50 people to having 70 now. And then I guess by the end of this year, we'll probably have like 72 to 74, which is kind of crazy. Like we got to this weird point around 50 where like I was starting to see people I didn't know, which is a weird feeling because I like knowing everybody at the company, but it was like we were hiring so fast that like people were coming in like, I don't know who this person is. And I feel really weird. Like I don't, because I don't want to just walk over there and start talking to them and be like, hey, I don't know you. I don't know. It's this weird thing. But yeah, we're always hiring.
Kind of mentioned it when you said what not to do when making your first game is making your dream game. You said that one of your games was similar to your dream game, but did you actually ever try to make your dream game?
No, I have not made my dream game yet. So I have two dream games, and they're both licensed, and I don't know if I'll ever get to make them. So I want to make a game based on Die Hard, and I got very close to getting that license with Fox once. But even if I had gotten the license, there was no way I was going to make it because it was like this classic, like overly ambitious idea where, we were going to let the player basically simulate the movie. It was a very complicated design that, with our skill set at the time, this was maybe 2013, 2014, we pitched it. It wasn't going to happen. And then my other game, another Fox property that we pitched and almost got was Home Alone. I really wanted to make a Home Alone game. And it was going to be like Tecmo's Deception mixed with like The Incredible Machine or Incredible Contraption. I don't remember what that game's called, but you're going to be setting up these elaborate, it's again, basically simulating the movie, just getting to set up like these elaborate torturous traps inside of your home and then watching the AI try to get you basically and seeing your traps play out. And it was just overly ambitious and there was no way I could have done it then. I have the resources now where I could like probably fund somebody else to make it, but it's like this thing where I want to make it myself. And Saturday Morning RPG is a game that I'm really passionate about. I don't think it was ever really my dream game, but now like I want to revisit it and I want to make more games, but I don't know if I'll ever get to that point because Limited Run's just so fast. Like at this point, we've been around since 2015. That's 7 years, and we've done over 1,000 physical products, and that's like unique physical games. If you just break that down to like the components, like plush, keychains, coins, soundtracks, whatever, like we've done a new physical thing like once every 2 days for the last 7 years. And it's like this incredible pace that like, I don't get time to focus on making games anymore, which kind of sucks, but hope I get there someday.
So this kind of goes off what you were just talking about. What was the only push going from game development to publishing? Like, was that solely monetary?
No, it was one of those things where it's like, it was a passion of mine. I've always loved collecting games, but it became so successful that I didn't even realize it was happening, basically. Like, when we first did Limited Run, I was still managing Mighty Rabbit. Like, I was still heading up game projects. We were working on, like, a stealth game where you played as an elephant. And Humble actually paid us for, like, the first version of it. And you can download it from, like, their vault, I think. It's still up there, Elephant in the Room. But we were working on that game for a while, and I was balancing that with the Limited Run side, but then like Limited Run just kept getting more and more demanding on my time that I just kind of fell into needing to focus on that. Like, there's no part of me that doesn't like what I do now. Like, I love it. I love going to work. Like, I would not trade what I have for anything else, but there's something special about like the old days where I was kind of making a game in a void, basically. Like, I liked it when nobody cared about what I was doing, and I was just able to just kind of quietly make a game somewhere, and like that's what I miss about making games. So I kind of hope one day I can get there, but I wouldn't say that anything I've ever done has been purely monetary, and it still isn't, because I do things like acquire plumbers don't wear ties, where it's like, why would you do that if you like any person with conventional sense would be like, that's probably not a good business move, but like I try to do things that just appeal to my own personal whims or sensibilities or whatever, and then I hope there are other people that like those things or will kind of get excited about them. And just so happened that with Limited Run, people kept getting excited about the things I was doing, and it just kind of became so demanding. And I hear this story a lot, like a lot of the founders that I know of companies, they will start out as programmers, and they will start out very heavily involved with making the games work and function, and that's what they love. But as their companies grew, they had to fall into more desk jobs. Like, founders just kind of end up in this spot where, like, at some point when you have 30 employees, you end up having to be the person that's making sure the revenue's coming in, and making sure that, you know, the accountants are working on the tax and the HR person's working on all the HR stuff. And, you know, you slowly fall out of doing some of these more nitty gritty things that you loved doing early on. That's kind of where I am now, but I still love what I do. I still love every single moment of it. So.
So I guess if you're not working for somebody else, how do you figure out any like creative disagreements you have with everybody? Like, you both have like different visions for a game. Like, given your experience, how exactly would you say you work through those?
So me and my co-founder get into arguments a lot, and generally it just ends up being one of us will eventually concede. Like, you have to get to a point where one of you will realize that one of the things you want is not the right path. Like, I think generally if you surround yourself with reasonable people, you'll reach reasonable conclusions eventually. We also, a lot of the times, will just meet in the middle. So, and I would say on Saturday Morning RPG, there were a lot of times where, you know, me and the people I was working with had kind of creative disputes on things. But generally, I would try to not overexert my role as the lead developer, and I would let my developers kind of do what they wanted to, you know, within reason. You know, if they were trying to do something absolutely like obviously this is bad, but if it was something that was just like if I couldn't come up with a good reason as to why it was bad, I'd be like, okay, even if I don't necessarily like it, we'd try it. And, you know, that's kind of how I would approach those things back then. But now I think it's kind of a give and take thing, you know. I concede on things that my co-founder wants. He concedes on things that I want. And sometimes we meet in the middle, and it always works itself out if you have reasonable, level-headed people that you're working with. Just don't work with people that are narcissists. Don't work with somebody that always wants their own way, because that's not going to work out. Anybody else?
Just for fun, what is like the worst experience you've had with trying to publish a game?
Man. We had one developer that we were just shocked that they managed to actually like make a game, because my engineer would kind of give him very clear instructions like, hey, do this to submit your game, and he'd be like, I don't see this thing here. And it got to the point where like my engineer had to create a 20-page document like showing every single button that needed to be clicked and every single thing that needed to be done. Like, this is all super straightforward stuff. It was just the most ridiculous document I've ever seen, and he had to create it to kind of walk this dev through doing this very simple thing. And by the end of it, we were just like, I don't know how this person made a game. And that ended up being a product that I think took several months to ship just because we could not figure out how to get the developer to do what we needed the developer to do. It was like shocking how amateur this person was at this. But everybody I've worked with has been like a great person. So I don't say that as like, you know, a slight against that individual, but in terms of their like technical expertise, that really wasted a ton of our resources. So that was kind of grueling, I think. I'm trying to think of other like nightmare experiences, but there really haven't been a lot. Like generally, like we tend to work with like really great people. And all the people that I've worked with have been great. Like even people who are kind of industry icons, when I get to work with them, I'm kind of like surprised at how like humble they are. Like we sent a box of stuff to Ken and Roberta Williams, who started Sierra. You know, they made King's Quest, and Sierra eventually, when at the end of Sierra's Road, I think it merged with Vivendi Universal, and then that went into Activision. And you know, Sierra published Half-Life. Like, you know, they did a lot of like crazy big things. And we sent a box of stuff to them, and just watching them open that box on camera, they were just like so excited about everything. And it was just this weird experience to see like these people that started this game company that meant a lot to me growing up, like doing this. It's just, I don't know, everyone in the game industry is great. So I think there are people who are bad, but we have avoided most of them for the most part. Because you hear stories. The other thing with the game industry is it's really small. So if you're a bad person, like it goes around really fast, and people will know very quickly, don't work with this person. And I think that's kind of how we've avoided a lot of bad experiences.
Going up like to talk about the Sierra people, what has been like the most like awestruck or like most amazing person that you've met through this?
It's hard to say. So I think the person that I've been the most inspired by is this guy named Sam, who was a producer at Naughty Dog. And he had worked at Sony since 1997. So he was working there back in the original PlayStation days as a QA guy. And he rose up from QA all the way to being the lead producer of the Uncharted series and Last of Us. And he's just the nicest, most humble guy. And kind of talking to him about his background, I found out that he spent like 5 years homeless, like living on the street with absolutely nothing. And he just decided one day, like he was just gonna pick his life up and make things work. And within the next like 2 weeks, he had applied at Sony. And I guess he was living out of a shelter when he started there. And to think that this guy went from like living on the street, like dealing with being homeless, to now like basically leading one of the biggest entertainment franchises out there. It's like, that's a really crazy, inspiring story. Like, I haven't met anyone quite like Sam. Like, he's the coolest guy I've ever met. And it's just been great getting to talk to him and learn about his experiences. It was also kind of nice meeting John Romero, the creator of Doom. Like, he was super cool to talk to and humble, like just getting to hear all his stories. It was just cool hearing the stories. I wouldn't say they were necessarily inspiring. It's just John will talk forever. So if you get a chance to sit down with him, like he'll just tell you stories forever, and they're great stories. So it's just like, you know, you could get like days worth of entertainment out of him because he'll just not stop telling you things, and it's fun. But most inspiring is Sam. I don't know why his name is escaping me right now. I don't know why. But yeah, that's Sam Thompson. Duh, easy last name. Anyways, yeah. Anybody else? And you guys are on point. It's like 5 minutes till 9. Way to go.